Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. Thank you for being back. We have huge pleasure tonight to have my friend, my recent colleague, Dr. Paula Green. Thinking about that she's emeritus in the field of peace building. It's one of the unique, I think, worldwide position that somebody had so much strong activism part, but also academical part. What is really important to us in peace building, because after the Bosnian War, when I have started to work in peace building, we didn't almost have any books to learn from them how to work with people. So we would use some old manuals, not old, but like very much used books from the Lebanon War and from the Northern Ireland too. And it's really essential that people like Dr. Paula Green exist and try to put all these things what we are doing actually in books, and to leave it for the generation who will come. I will now read you her biography, and then we will do our usual thing like 20, 20, 20. And 20 minutes Paula will speak, and then 20 minutes we will be in groups, and then 20 minutes we'll be back to discuss in panel. So Dr. Paula Green is the founder and former director of the Karuna Center. She directed, designed, and implemented multi-year programs in peace building, intercommunal dialogue, and reconciliation for diverse stakeholders for the first 15 years of the organization assistance. Dr. Green has extensive international experience in peace building and conflict transformation as an international consultant, facilitator, and lecturer in US, Europe, Asia, Africa, in the Middle East, and brings a sense of the social responsibility and spiritual awareness to her work as a psychologist, educator, and leader in the peace building field. As professor of conflict transformation, the School of International Training in Baltimore, Vermont, Dr. Green co-directed the conflict transformation across cultures contact program, Summer Institute, and the Gratitude Certificate program designed to strengthen and support the community building in conflict intervention efforts of peace builders. During Dr. Green's subsequent tenure as senior fellow at the Karuna Center, she authored the training guide Peace Building in Divided Communities, Karuna Center's approach to training, and co-edited the textbook Psychology and the Social Responsibility Facing Global Challenges. She has served as an active board member for several international peace organizations, including the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, and continues to engage with the Karuna Center as senior peace building advisor and consultant. You see that the biography I'm reading about the Dr. Paula Green is from the page of Karuna Center for Peace Building, because we just had the project I was working on, and that's the way actually how I met Dr. Green. So let's start now. Please, Paula, you can start.
Thank you, Amr. That was a very long introduction, and I'm going to get a lot more personal than that because it was pretty abstract. I'm really glad to be here. I have a profound connection to Bosnia, and I want to start off talking about that. And then I want to tell you about my work in the United States, bridging divides. And then we'll think about what's different, what's similar between what you're going through, what we're going through with divides in our countries, and where we go from there. So I started an NGO, an organization, nonprofit organization in 1994. I called it Karuna Center. Karuna is a word that comes from India. And I had just spent a year in India and South Asia when I founded the organization. So I gave it that name, and it means compassion. And for me, it was about the compassion for all the people who suffer from war and violence, which I feel is something extra. Life has lots of suffering for all of us, and armed conflict and violence are more than we human beings should have to bear. So I started it in 1994, and we had little projects. And then in 1996, I got a call from a Bosnian woman with a translator on the phone who had been a resident of Prijedor for many generations in her family. And she had been expelled and was living in Sunski Most. And she had been expelled with her entire community. And as Prijedor was ethnically cleansed, she wound up in Sunski Most, as did most of the Bosniaks, then called Bosnian Muslims. And one of them is Vahidin Omanovic, who probably all of you know from his peace building work and his connection with Brian and Amra. So she called and asked if our organization would come to Bosnia. And that was in 1996. So it was just a year after the war ended. And 1 year later in 1997, we had made it possible. We had raised the money and figured out what to do, and we had come to Bosnia. And it was just a Sunski Most then. And it changed my life. It was my first time being in an area that had just experienced the kind of war that you or your parents have lived through. And I met incredible people. One of the things I learned doing this work now all over the world is that after violence, it's the bravest people who show up to say, how do we heal? How do we put this country back together again? How do I put myself and my own heart back together again? And that of my family and my community. And the ones who show up are brave and courageous, like you are, and really ready to step in and help others. So first, in the beginning, it was just women. It was just Bosniak women. And in the very first circle, we kind of sat around and cried. People introduced themselves. And as they did, they began immediately talking about all the family members they had lost. And then the next person spoke, and the next around the circle, and the loss was tremendous. And it was really a kind of opportunity to share the grief, because each woman was holding that grief inside because she didn't want to upset her family or friends. And then we discovered how important it was to share it. And I asked the women what the first project might be. What could they do to make life easier for themselves as exiles trying to survive in Sunski Most, with everything they had ever known and loved disappeared? And they said, well, we want to take care of our old people. And I said, what stands in your way? And they said, well, in our culture, we can't visit them without a gift. And we don't have anything. As it turned out, my community in the United States and Massachusetts had sent me to Bosnia with suitcases full of things for the Bosnian women. Hats and gloves for winter, and shampoo and soap and scarves and all sorts of things. And I said, well, if we can solve that problem, would you visit the elders? And so that began. We unpacked the suitcases, everybody took things, and people began a project. And pretty soon, I started to go back every couple of months. And pretty soon, the women said to me, we want to talk to the Serbs who now live in Prijedor. Some had always lived in Prijedor, some had been expelled from Sunski Most and were then living in Prijedor. And we don't know how to make it happen, but we want you to make it happen. That was a pretty scary assignment. And I said, why do you want to do this? And they said, because before the war, these women were our friends, our neighbors, and our relatives. And now there were troops on the road between the two towns, and we can't go, and we don't know anything about anybody over there. So because I had a US passport, I was able to go to Prijedor. And it was like a search from hell in the beginning, because I didn't know anybody there, have any connections, but we made connections. Of course, I had translators with me, and we found some Prijedor women who we were able to bring to Sunski Most in one of my visits, and we began the dialogue program. And we started with 3 Serbs, and then 6, and then 8, and it grew. And we had a very profound program for 2 years. I must have been there about 6 times in those 2 years. There were no hotels. I stayed with families. And then the women together, the women from Prijedor, the women from Sanski Most, who were both Bosniak and Serb, said, a few Croats, not so many in that region, said, well, now we'd like you to talk to the teachers. So my assignments kept being pushed up. And I said, why? And they said, because the teachers are the key to the future of Bosnia. And if you can help them with the kind of understanding that you've helped us to develop, Bosnia has a chance. Then, of course, I had to go to the Ministry of Education, Bosnian Federation and Serb Republic, and get permission, because you can't enter a school and work with teachers without having permission from the ministry. And both sides approved. We began a new project with educators living in Sanski Most and educators living in Prijedor. And that's where I met Vahidin. His principal told him he had to go to the program. Vahidin was maybe 24 at the time, something like that. He was a young teacher. He said, I'm not going. I'm never going to talk to a Serb again in my life. There's no way I can do that. I want to kill them. I can't go. His principal said, I've selected you when you're going. And so he came, and that changed his life. Completely changed his life. We've now been working together for the past 25 years. He stays in my home. I stay in his home. I know his family. He knows my family. And we're very close. And he was one of the few people who spoke any English at all, because he had learned it in the refugee camp in Slovenia. And so we were able to converse a little bit. So that project went on. Then we called it Project Diacom, the Project for Dialogue and Community Building in Bosnia. And it went on for 3 years. And then we did a training of trainers. We picked out about 8 Serbs and 8 Bosniaks who we felt were ready. And we did a training of trainers with them for them to be able to continue this work. So I commuted to Bosnia for a long time, and it opened my heart. The people opened my heart, the culture, everything about your country touched me very deeply. And we've stayed working. I've been back 4 or 5 times over the years to Sanski Most and Prijedor, Sarajevo, and other places. And the last one, as Amra said, was quite recently. The past couple of years, I worked in Sarajevo through the various organizations. And after that, we had requests to go to Macedonia and Kosovo and even Belgrade to work with different groups. So I learned a lot from that. And I also began to get requests from Israelis and Palestinians and from people in various Asian and African countries. So Karuna Center became an international organization, the foundation of which was Bosnia. Taught me the most. And I also became a professor and began to train other people in peace building. And I've been doing it now for a long time, for maybe 30 years or so. And then in 2016, when we had the elections in the United States, I thought, it's here. The divisions, the hatred, the fear of each other, the saying terrible things about others is right here. And so I thought I had to focus some work in the United States. And we started a dialogue program here between the place where I live, where the people were supporters of Hillary Clinton at the time and now Biden, and the state called Kentucky, which is about 1,000 miles away. And the people in the region that we work in worked in coal mines. They were very poor. They were much less educated than people in Massachusetts. And they voted for Trump. And they still vote for Trump. And we founded a dialogue program. And I chose to make the dialogue program one that would be very intimate and very rich. And so, because it was so far away, we got together for 3 or 4 days at a time. And the people from Kentucky have come here and we've gone there, and then they came here again. We're supposed to be there this month, but now with COVID, nobody travels. So now we do it on Zoom, which is not nearly as much fun, but we have to. And we learned a great deal about ourselves and about others and about how to listen in deeper ways than we had ever listened to anybody before, and how to care about people whose stories are completely different than ours, which is what you're asked to do also in Bosnia. Because according to who you are, who your parents were, where they were in the time of the war, their stories are very different from yours and yours from them. And how we bridge these divides in your country and our country and every other country in the world is the biggest question facing us. Because when I listen to what's happening in the United States, I think Bosnia. And I say to myself, oh, I know what happens when there's enough hatred to go around. And it's kind of worse now because of social media. So everything has a big microphone and is blown up worse than it was 25 years ago in Bosnia, because there was no social media. There weren't even cell phones. But now it's even more dangerous. And because I know the steps and I see where it goes, I'm working as hard as I can here with others to help people wake up and realize that this is very serious and we have to pull back. It's like we're standing at the edge of a cliff and we could fall over, or we could pull back from the cliff. So that's what I'm doing now. And that's what I want to talk about today with you. And that's enough of an introduction of me. I like to respond to questions and to have conversations. I don't like to give lectures. I think it's kind of boring. So I want to invite you to make comments, ask questions, and tell me what you want to think about together. And somebody will have to be brave and go first.
Everyone, I'd encourage you, feel free to jump in right away with a question, but also feel free to engage the chat. Or if you have an unformulated question, feel free to message Orhan, Amra, or me. And
then we will not go in the
it.
group. Shall we stay then here, Brian?
I would love to stay. I'd love to stay and engage here. I think that'd be great.
Yeah,
I think it's better. Yeah, super,
Yeah.
super.
Yeah,
it's much better. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
May I go?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Orhan. I'm in Sarajevo. I'm originating from Serbia, but I'm Bosniak, and this is very, very helpful what you just told us, and Mrs. Green. And what struck me the most is the vision about work with teachers, and really I think it is very, very much important. And as for dialogue and what is bothering you now over there overseas and bothering us here for more than 2 decades, there's one point. Yes, we want to make that dialogue, we want to communicate, we don't want to be in cubicles, so in such way manipulated, but there are some red lines. I'm encountering here people who are glorifying war criminals. So he's a hero. There's no dialogue. That's okay, close. Yeah. So how to deal that kind of situation? And it is not my biased view, because it is a verified war criminal. There's a war tribunal in Hague, and it is established by United Nations, not by me, not by any Muslim country or whatever. And there was trial and evidences and witnesses, and there was a decision ruled. The guy is a criminal and he's sentenced to lifetime. And I come here, I want to make dialogue, and the other guy says, no, he's hero. Yeah. how to deal such situations. I don't think that you have such situations in United States in that scale.
We don't.
Thank you.
Thank you, Orhan, for saying all of that. We don't have people here in quite that scale, but we have people here who are guilty of very serious crimes, and they are also glorified. And it puzzles me all the time to understand what that's about. And we see dictators all over the world, present and past, who are glorified by people. And the question that I ask myself is, what does that dictator or that president or that war criminal represent to those people? What's underneath all this glorification? Is it because he represents my community, which I think has been harmed? He represents my community, which I think nobody ever understood the way he does. He represents my religion in ways that I feel connected to him. So it's about something. It seems crazy behavior, but there's something going on, some identity going on. In this country, it feels like Trump speaks for many people. He's become their voice, and they're very attached to him because he's become their voice in a way that nobody else is. Even if he does terrible things, they can say, he represents me. He cares about me. He cares about me so much that he'll hurt the people that I want to see hurt. So when I don't know if this makes sense to you, Orhan, but when I'm in groups, I try to understand the person that I'm talking to underneath the angry message. I have no support whatsoever for their worship of war criminals, but I have to get to understand them as human beings and not demonize them, not make them terrible, because that just makes it worse. It doesn't make it better. Does that help you at all?
Should I go or should I stay with those persons?
Does it help you at all? You can answer that.
I don't know if it broke up there. It was a really brilliant question by Orhan saying, should I go? Should I leave that relationship or should I stay in there?
Stay if you can.
We didn't understand. Great. Yeah. Okay.
Stay if you can tolerate it. Stay if you can find someplace the humanity of that other. I'm going to tell you. I want to tell you a wonderful story. When I worked in South Africa, I worked with an incredible African woman, Black woman, who had been on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She was a psychologist. And she decided that she wanted to interview the man who was the major driving force behind the movement that killed her people. A white guy who had been a top of the heap in South Africa. And he was in prison for life. And she got this idea that she wanted to start interviewing him. He was in solitary confinement in the most important severe prison in South Africa. And she got permission to do a series of interviews with him. And people were shocked by what she was doing. She was terrified. And she would see him she wrote a book about this. She would see him every week or two for a couple of years. No matter how horrible his crimes had been, she was digging down to find the human being underneath, to have the courage to do that. And when he was executed by the government, she wrote a book which she called A Human Being Died That Night, because by then he had become a human being to her. And I knew this woman well. We worked together, and she and her book and her story astounded me. And it's what I'm saying to you, Orhan, about stay if you can to try to find the humanity underneath all the show about loving dictators and loving war criminals, because something's there. There's a human being there. And somehow that human being is hurting, but it's all covered over, all that hurt, because he can't show it. But that's your job as a detective.
Wow, that's a living peace builder. Thank you so much, Paula. Thank you so much. We have some people writing the question in our chat.
I'm more writing quotes, just so you know, Amra. So
I know. But before that, there was a question.
Well, feel free to give me a question of your choice. I'm not reading the chat. You are.
No. Brooke asked you, what was one of your first big learning moments when you realized a key point or part of peacemaking? Perhaps a learning through failure moment, basically a big takeaway or turning point for you.
Oh, that's a great question, Brooke. Thank you. I would say for me, one of the big turning points was understanding that the people from Prijedor, who were Serbs, Bosnian Serbs, could not acknowledge what had happened in their city. Even though we had dialogue groups all the time, over and over and over, I saw that it was too painful for them to tell themselves the truth about what had happened. And that for them to survive, to keep their minds together, they had to pretend they didn't know. And you probably all know that there were several concentration camps in Prijedor, became known to the world, but they couldn't let it in. It was if there was a box right here, and they could see only here, and they couldn't see on either side what was happening. And I learned that I couldn't push them faster than they were able to go, but that my job as the group leader was to hold up the truth for the Bosniaks. In other words, when the Bosniaks talked about having been there, because some of the people in the group were there, and some people lost relatives there, I had to say, yes, that happened. Because they had to know that they were not crazy, and that I believed them, and that what they were saying was fundamentally true. And so I had to hold that with them until the Serbs slowly, over years, were finally able to say, yes, it's true. That's what happened in my city. And that was a huge learning for me, Brooke, because I want people to tell the truth, to speak the truth. But sometimes the defenses are all they have in the world. And I can't do this. I can't bash through them. I have to wait, trust them, care about them, and wait until they can acknowledge it. And it took years, but it was an important learning for me.
Thank you so much. These are amazing, amazing testimonies. Adnan, you would like to ask something too.
Okay. I'm Adnan Hasanbegovic, and hi, Paula. Thank you very much on your inspired and for me very close story. And thank you. You are talk openly about all this experience, and it's. I am a peace activist almost 20 years, more than 20 years, and I am active in a field, basically mostly actually involving reconciliation among people in Bosnia, but wider in the region. Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, Kosovo, and Macedonia. And I worked 18 years with veterans. Even today I am in contact and trying to do on that field something. And your story remind me on that, how much people, because veterans are mostly are very hard nationalistic group, and most of them are still very much in nationalism, or like you said now, don't want or don't cannot see the true, or I don't know, they have own justification process in head. How, especially for veterans, is hard to deal with the, let's say, aspects from the war which are not going in direction that they prefer. You know, I mean, this is another narrative, or facing with the crimes what your side made during the war. It's very hard to deal with it, because that's mean that you are bad guy or fascist, or I don't know, not defender, that you are aggressor or something like that. And it's very hard for individuals to deal with that. Generally, I am a veteran also, and I was in Army of BiH in Sarajevo. And I was in a unit where the commander was the war criminal, Caco. He was the one of the famous commander in Sarajevo in the beginning of war, and he and his group made very awful crimes against, mostly against Serbs, civilians in Sarajevo. And for me, it was very hard to deal with that. Actually, I know that's happening even during the war, but we not ignore, but you are in position that you cannot change too much. I was ordinary soldier and something, but of course that in that period we didn't realize how to deal with that. But fortunately, our government in 1993 in October organized not, I don't know, that was action who tried to stop him, my commander, who is a criminal, to, you know, to stop him what he is doing and try to arrest, but unfortunately they killed him in that operations. That was very frustrating and hard days for us and for me, when we practically have small war inside Sarajevo. I was a part of it. But generally I want to speak now about this, dealing with the bad side of your bad side of your side, let's say. Every, like we said here, every medal have another side. And also for me, that was very hard to, when I accept that for me, that was not surprise that was happening, these war crimes, but for me, it was hard to deal with the people who are ignored that, or even justifies that what he done, or I don't know, all these kind of elements who are appearing among people because of very hard and brutal siege in Sarajevo, and people start to hate other groups because of that, and then they justifies even crimes against innocent people from that aggressor group. And that's awful, because it's probably I was very confused, especially after war, when the 11,000 people came on his funeral of that commander, and then to show him respect. And I was very confused and how to deal with that now. And because I also had period when I met that commander, that he was okay with us. He was help us, and I was the soldier and in his units, and he helped us to for better fighting and surviving in this hard position on the front lines. And he is a very talented military leader. And he is the hero practically in that period, especially first month of the war. But after a while, he became criminal, war criminal. And when the people ask our first president what he think about him, he said that he is the hero and criminal. And in that period, for me, that was the blasphemy. But today, I understand that is the truth statement, especially because later on, I see also one of my very familiar and favorite imams from Sarajevo, who is the Sheikh Effendi Haji Muj. He was the leader of the funeral praying for that commander, and I was not shocked, but I was, confused what he are doing now. Like why he making this praying on his grave, and I was angry in some way on him. But later, on, years after, I will realized, even through my own personal spirituality, that he was do okay thing because he prayed for his soul. He didn't said that he is good or bad guy, like in Quran says. One part of Quran ayat said that I think I forget who talking, but I think just Isa alayhi salam, Jesus Christ, talking about he sending message to God and said, if you Almighty punish them, you are Lord of them. If you are forgive them, you are glories and mercy are biggest, or something like that. Because God, on the end, is that who forgive or not, and that's not our human action. But we, if I understand that later, that we can be even on that funeral or something, but it's important to not later on talking about that guy like in totally positive aspects, or put in his picture or glorify him on everyday scale, on some, especially what in a mainstream culture people doing that through the nationalism. And it's important for me because it's my personal story which are helped me to go in the peace building and working on a reconciliation. And when I deal with and have a conversation and dialogue with Croats or Serbs
Adnan,
fighters who
please,
are war
Adnan,
criminals,
try
and I
to go
just want
to the end.
what?
Try to
Sorry?
go to the end.
Yeah, I just want to finish now that I was one of my answers how to deal with what Orhan said, how to deal with when the other side or support own criminals. That's normal human status sometimes, only which I make differences between I like more honest nationalists who will really believe in that. Besides that, there is opportunists who are just doing that because of interest. And for me, it's important to try find a way to transformation and common true looking for
Thank you.
across the side.
Thank you. Thank you for all of this, for everything that you've shared. It's all, I think, important. And I appreciate your taking the risk and being honest to tell us your own story. It's a big story. When I first went to Sanski Most, the Bosniak woman who had invited me wanted me to go to talk to the veterans there. There was no hospital. There was kind of a home for veterans who had been wounded, Bosniak veterans. And she wanted me to go to talk to them. And I didn't feel comfortable with that, but I agreed if she felt it was important. And they didn't want to talk to me. They couldn't. They were so ashamed because they felt they had lost the war and weren't able to defend their city, their cities. And they were not at all ready to come into a conversation like this. And I said to her, this is not going to work. I don't want to be there. They don't want me. She was premature about that. And you've been on a long journey. and you've come to the point where you can talk about this now, and that's to your credit a lot. But people have to learn to be able to handle the trauma and the
Yeah,
shame
of course.
of the war. And you know, there's an expression in English that one man's hero is another man's terrorist. So according to where I stand, that's what I see. I see out of these eyes in this direction, and you see out of those eyes in this direction, and we see very different things. And everything in our lives encourages us to see one way or another. And this business of being able to actually step into the shoes of another and imagine you can see out of their eyes and out of their biography, one of the ways that which we help to humanize each other. But it's a very, very long road. And my country is struggling with that terribly now. We have negative images about half the country, just like Bosnians did. And they're frozen and stuck right now, and nobody wants them to shift. But over time, they have to shift. And for people like you who are able to do that, you're what we call a wounded healer. You're a person who's had your own trauma, your own terrible things that you saw in war. And sometimes it's things that people actually did in war, but you healed enough to be able to help others, which puts you in a wonderful position.
Yeah.
In some ways, in a better position than those of us who have never fought, because you get it. You get it deep in your heart. And you're the kind of person that we need to help heal others. And since you've been doing this for a long time, you're patient. You've learned that it takes a long time. But we can't give up on people. We can't give up on rebuilding our community because we need it. And what you're doing is a tremendous contribution to others. And I honor that in you, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Paul. I have a similar opinion about you, General.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We have Samia who would like to ask or say something.
Thank you. Actually, I think both Adnan and Orhan sort of asked in a different way was what I was thinking about. In terms of trying to gain some empathy for what I'm hearing from our Bosnian friends about the trauma that they experienced and so forth, I was like trying to relate back to my own experiences. The trauma that I've survived is a different kind of trauma. It's of being sexually abused as a child. One of the things that I remember in the course of my healing journey was that in the first so many years of after experiencing that abuse, I was like really like full of shame and guilt. And one of the things that really helped me to step out of that shame and guilt was a sense of righteous anger. Like when someone finally said to me, it's not your fault. And I really took that message to heart. And I was like, yeah, this is not my fault. It's that person who abused me. And so that sense of righteous anger really helped me overcome that sense of blame and shame. And so I thought of it as a very good and empowering thing until that anger started to like really just consume so much of my life and started to spill out into so many of my relationships and so much of like the way that I thought and acted, even when it didn't have anything to do with dealing with the trauma of the abuse or dealing with the people who were involved with that. The anger was just like spilling out into all areas of my life. And so I realized at some point that, as helpful as the righteous anger was at one point in my healing journey, at another point, it sort of becomes an obstacle. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the role of this kind of righteous anger and what the next step might be beyond righteous anger. I think you have already been sort of talking about that. So I guess this is just getting to that from a slightly different perspective.
That's great, Sami. Again, thank you. Thank you for being so self-disclosing and talking about your own life. And I feel like you've just outlined the healing journey in a way, starting with the way the violence directed at us gets internalized as shame and humiliation, and sometimes guilt. It's all my fault, I made it happen. And especially with a child where there's not much cognition yet, and those internal stories of guilt and shame are very destructive. But they're part of the journey. And then to turn it into righteous anger, that's good. That's a step in a healthy direction. But if we hold on to our anger, we poison ourselves, because the anger is poisonous. And after we get it out, if we keep holding on to it, we can ruin our life, because then we're always leading with anger. And you know how many people do that their entire lives. They can't get past, they don't even know it's righteous anger, it's just anger, and they can't get past it. And also, I think in a sense, every woman on the planet has righteous anger, because every woman on the planet has experienced discrimination, and that creates anger. So it's a healthy phase, and we see it in the Black Lives Matter movement in this country. Tremendous amounts of righteous anger. It's got to come out. It's necessary, but it's got to be transitional, and otherwise we hurt the self. And what comes out of it is a more balanced person who understands that anger can be an appropriate motivator for personal change, but it's only a stop on the way to personal change, and it has to get replaced by recognition that it's a vehicle serving a purpose, but you don't want it there your whole life. And that leads me to the question of, so what comes next? And for some people, I would say there's not a forgiveness, but there's an acknowledgement. Oh, I understand what happened. I was violated, I was harmed, I was left unprotected, whether it's sexual abuse or war. And I have to live with that the rest of my life. But I have to live with it from the distance of here and not going at it or not having it come at me all the time. But it's a fact of my life. And again, that makes you a wounded healer. And the people who show up after war, we're all wounded healers. We've all been through some sort of trauma or insult or harm to our person that has made us sensitive. And that sensitivity is now used for human good, for healing others. And when you see others who are angry, you know that's their righteous anger. And then you can help guide them through to a place where they're also able to serve. And the ones that we have the hardest time talking to are the ones who can't let go of that anger. That they're so attached to the anger because they're so scared of what's underneath. The anger, I often feel like the anger is a cover up for the fear. And that what's at the bottom, when I go down through all the emotions that each of us is carrying, we get down to the bottom, it's fear. And for most people, they don't have the courage to admit their fear. And they'd rather go on hating the whole world than say, I'm scared. So I think you've come on a long journey and you're now there to serve others. And it's beautiful. So thank you.
Hi, Paula. My name is Mirella. Nice to meet you. And thank you so much for what you just shared. My question for you would be, I live in Sarajevo and I see a lot of anger around me every day. Just a simple explanation or example is when people are driving their cars. It's a tremendous amount of anger. And it's not just like you see it in other parts of the world. You know, this is something deeper. This is a way how people honk. It's you can almost hear the trauma honking through that. So I'm wondering, what, as a psychologist, how do you see psychology playing a part in that? Do you think that through that we can actually express our anger and come to that point of fear and actually talk about it?
No,
Um,
no, it's unconscious. You know what I'm going to move because I just got the sun. What Salia was talking about, the last question, what Samia was talking about was coming to recognize the anger for what it is. But these folks driving around Sarajevo have no idea what the anger is about. And so it doesn't serve them. It keeps them from touching a real emotion. Anger is safe. Fear feels unsafe. Feeling vulnerable is unsafe, and anger is a push away from that vulnerability. And I think especially for guys who are conditioned in all of our cultures to be less self-disclosing, more afraid of their vulnerable, soft, gentle sides, that's the way they're going to express themselves, with the anger. But I don't think it serves any constructive purpose for them, because it doesn't shift consciousness. They're not aware of it.
yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So do you think that alongside the peacemaking, for you as a psychologist, do you think that psychology is also a way to deal with these things on a collective level?
I think psychological insights are very definitely a way to help this. And you know, what if there was a media campaign in all of Sarajevo that where people in the media who had knowledge began talking about, I wonder why there's so much aggression when people were driving. What's this about? And start to unpack it and reveal it and discuss it, so that you're not pointing at any one individual, but you're making this a citywide campaign to say, what's going on here? And here are some insights from psychology. We'll just toss them out and see if people will respond in any way through that kind of massive education to look at their own anger.
Thank you.
Oh, I like it so much. We should make like campaign. Are you warning because of anger of the war,
Right,
or your transgenerational trauma? And
right.
people start to be aware about that, what they are carrying. Because really, I have spent some time recently in Zagreb and in Croatia, and I saw that people are don't have that kind of specific anger. What Mirala was just describing. Thank you very much, both Mirala and Paula. I think that we have just 1 minute more, but we have Brian who would like to say something, and then I will give last word to Paula, and then we will finish. Brian, please.
Thank you, Amra. Now, I was curious as a question, so I know we don't have a lot of time, so we can try to be concise and just get to the beginning of an answer. But whether we look at here in Bosnia and the amount of anger, whether or not you're thinking about the Bosniak narrative and thinking about anger, about lack of recognition, ethnic cleansing, losing family members. I love what you said about fear being the root. But I mean, you can look at this, whether it's Black Lives Matter, you already mentioned, whether it's, you know, rural white folks, or whether it's Christians in the United States, the loss of cultural power, and you see anger expressed in so many different ways. Serbs here. So when we start to understand these narratives, there is validity to why they're feeling afraid, even if they're not acknowledging it. There's a reason for their anger. And as you already mentioned, they don't want to move away from the safety of anger towards the vulnerability of fear, of acknowledging fear. So whenever people have this legitimate reason for anger and for fear, and they don't feel safe, what kind of recommendations would you have? Because I mean, this impacts piecework. It's like one thing on an impersonal level to try to say, hey, how can I be there for you? But how does this then relate to piecework writ large in a way, in terms of how do we think about this and approach it in order to try to meet that underlying need for safety, to address those fears?
Well, I think we have to learn to listen much more than we've ever listened. And we have to ask questions of curiosity, not questions of accusation, but ask questions of curiosity, and then learn about people and learn what's underneath it for them and help them feel safe enough in the relationship with you or with anybody else so that they're willing to talk about themselves. Because defenses defend. Defenses are there for a reason, because we're so scared. And they keep us from what we think is going to happen, is we're going to fall apart. If we ever tell the truth, we're going to fall apart. That's not the reality of what happens for most people, but it's the fantasy in the mind. And so because of that, everything is pushed away. Emotions are kept away and pushed away, except for anger. The only legitimate emotion we allow ourselves in that case is anger. And it's completely not productive. So it's a long process for each of us to become conscious and to help each other in that process of listening to each other and learning and gradually unpacking what's going on. There's always a story. Emotions arise, including anger, for a reason. It doesn't come out of the air. It comes from inside one's capacity to exist. And if one can only stay alive through anger because one is afraid that otherwise you'll disappear or you'll die, then you do. And I think what Amra just said about driving around Zagreb and not hearing people impatiently honking on their horns all day is a reminder of a traumatized society. And a strange way to show it, but there it is. It was a very interesting question. What goes on with all of this? It's anger. It's displaced into driving, into rage, and it's it's helplessness. Underneath it's helplessness. And boy, we don't want to feel that. That's dangerous. So we feel the anger.
You should experience drivers in Istanbul.
Worse.
No.
Worse.
We need to learn about the trauma there. Can you explain that, Orhan? But maybe that's for another time.
That's another conversation.
It's another time.
My suggestion is that we put funny sounds on these honking things in car.
Right. Amuse ourselves instead.
Then we would have a crazy city. Exactly. Paula, this was so helpful. I really feel, and I'm sure all of us feel, was that you were such a cure for our heart and for our souls. And I just wanted to tell you, if you didn't follow that, proudly we can say that in city of Sarajevo on last election, the Serb won as like not a mayor, but like a mayor of the main municipality in Sarajevo, and that's really something. What is 25 years later, yes, he was in army of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but people felt that they can vote finally for somebody who is other ethnic group, especially Serb. So I think that it's coming some better time in sense of understanding of other human being, and that some bridges are finally being overcome.
That's a wonderful story to end on. That mayor, and it makes me feel very good about 25 years of devotion to Bosnia. And let's hope that it leads the way toward greater and greater trust. And
Thank you. That's what I want to tell you.
That way. Good. I wish everybody well. Thank you so much for being together today. It was lovely to see you all. It renews my love for your country and for all its people. And I wish everybody peace and happiness and safety.
Thank you so much. Thank you all participants, and see you tomorrow 5 minutes before 6. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Paula.